I guess a good place to start would be, so from my understanding, you have wedding season, you submitted that to the comedy competition, you got runner up. And then from there, I guess you can just kind of start, or actually, can you start with how you even got started? Like what made you want to start screenwriting in the first place? And then I guess we can get into wedding season and then go from there.
Sure. I guess on some level, I always wanted to be a screenwriter. Like I was a movie junkie, TV junkie. But when I went to NYU, I did not go to film school. Like I very consciously did not go to film school because I just felt like it wasn't for people like me. And so I did like every other kinds of writing. I went to journalism school. I was an English major and I was an editor. I worked in book publishing, journalism, copywriting, I mean, literally every other kind of writing.
Yeah, I saw in that interview, I heard you actually were a journalist, right? You were a journalist in the beginning, and then you did copywriting, and then you went to screenwriting. At least that's what it said in that video. So
yeah, that's right. And it was really insane. When I was living in San Francisco, I had a copywriting job, and I was in my early 30s, and I just thought, if I don't make the leap to creative writing now, I feel like I'm never going to do it. And so I actually started taking a screenwriting class there with an amazing writer and teacher, Terrell Seltzer, who she wrote with Wayne Wong back in the day, like Chan is Missing. She wrote One Fine Day. And I really learned the ropes from her. And I think the nice thing about being in San Francisco is it wasn't like everybody's trying to write a screenplay. And so we had a really close-knit group of people who were really serious. And that's where I started writing the very first scenes and drafts of wedding.
That's awesome. Do you mind? So this is something that I hear a lot in the community. A lot of screenwriters talk about this, but it's pretty amazing that you took that leap. You had all these other jobs and then you made the shift over to screenwriting. A lot of people, sometimes when you hit a certain age, you kind of think like, I guess I'm not going to do it. Like I'm 29 myself. And I don't believe the age thing. Doesn't matter. Like you can do this at any age, but you kind of hear from a lot of people, they have that fear. So what was it that gave you the confidence? What was it that pushed you to say, I guess, like, if I don't do it now, when am I going to do it? What gave you that confidence to make the leap to go over to screenwriting or to like pursue it, to really pursue it?
Yeah, I think going into the class, I didn't know yet. I think I was somebody who had dabbled, like I told you, I tried every kinds of writing. I had dabbled in poetry and fiction and essays. But as soon as I took the class, it clicked. Like I knew I loved it. And I think that's something too, where I think people are afraid to try different classes. And I think if I had just tried a different creative writing class and thought, well, this isn't for me and stopped, I would have missed out on this whole other world, this whole opportunity. So I tried a lot of classes before I landed in screenwriting, and something about it clicked. And I just wanted to keep doing it and keep doing it and keep taking more classes and keep getting better at it. And that's how I knew that I had finally come to the right thing, even though subconsciously it was probably there the whole time. I think that feeling that I just wanted to do it in my free time. I just wanted to get better. I hadn't felt that with any other kind of writing before.
Gotcha. So then how did you find out, or I guess San Francisco, I mean, there's a lot of creatives and stuff there. It's not LA per se, but how did you when you finished, was wedding season the first script you wrote, or did you write a bunch of other scripts before that, by the way?
It was the first script I finished.
I'd written
a lot of scenes, a lot of half scripts, and I think like everybody else. But it's funny, in San Fran, I now live in Seattle, but I was in San Francisco for years, and that's where I started my career. I started doing the UCLA online classes to finish because that community was great. They would give feedback. It was a really helpful writer's group. But the rest of the week, it was, how do I push myself? Especially I had this freelance job at the same time. How do I push myself to actually produce pages and finish? And those UCLA classes were great because it was, this semester, we're finishing Act 1. And it was remote, so I could do it from San Francisco, from my desk. And like this semester, we're finishing the first half of Act 2, the second half of Act 2, and Act 3. And so that's really how I finished the first draft, was just being forced, signing up to force myself to turn in pages every week. Because otherwise I found there just wasn't the incentive with everything else that was going on in life. And I think some people are more self-motivated than that, but I at the time needed the external motivation. And within that time, I had found out that I was having twins. They're now 8. So it's a completely different life. But I think that also made me realize, like, if I don't finish that draft now, it's going to be a long time before I do.
Gosh, I mean, it's amazing that the first thing that you finished has gone on this journey, and it's going on Netflix, and I'm going to watch it, by the way. It's going to be released on Netflix on August 9th, right?
August 4th.
August 4th. Okay. Gotcha. Yeah. I'm definitely going to be checking that out. So I guess the next thing would be, I mean, that's amazing that it was your first thing that you finished, but what was the next step? So after you finished this script, did you go straight to like finding the ScreenCraft contest? Did you send it around? Did you try like networking? What did you do after you finished it?
Well, I use the word finished very loosely, because it's funny when I go back and look at the early versions of the script that I so-called finished, I think I just mean I reached fade out, or,
Gotcha.
Fades black for the very first time. It's almost a completely different script at this point, because I learned so much along the way. I joke that it's actually my first, second, and third script, because it changed so much as I learned more. So I think the first step was I wrote it. I got a lot of feedback from my writers group. It was clear it was not ready to be seen. Went back, revised some more. And that's when I started entering contests. And it wasn't at all immediate success. I don't think it broke through to quarterfinals or semis or anything. But I think what was helpful, especially being off in San Francisco, there's not a lot of people to get notes from, and people had already seen it. I used the contest to get notes and keep revising, and the UCLA classes to keep revising. And I think it had been, I don't even know how many years, it had been probably 4 years of that before I submitted it to that ScreenCraft contest.
Gotcha.
So, and at that point, it had already been through the rounds, probably 2 rounds of contest seasons before that.
Gotcha. So I guess I would love to know, can you talk about the story and the script? I know it's going to be released, so I'm not sure. Are you able to dig into the story a little bit? I would love to know about your idea for this story. What inspired you to tell this story? Because obviously, I mean, you must be very passionate about this story, to work on it for that amount of time and to keep, updating it. So if you don't mind, I would love to know a little bit about your inspiration behind it. That story.
I'm sure I can speak generally, as long as I don't give away any plot secrets. I'm sure I can.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, no spoilers, but
yeah, no spoilers. But I mean, I have always liked romantic comedies. I loved When Harry Met Sally. I loved Bridget Jones. But I also felt, I love 10 Things I Hate About You was sort of my era too. And I felt like I loved them, but there weren't storylines that reflected my life. And I kind of knew then that it was something I wanted to see, but I didn't know what to do about that, Yeah. So I think once I took the screenwriting class, it was at the time in my life when everyone was getting married, I was getting married, and it occurred to me that was so culturally rich. And I always liked the fake dating trope, the let's pretend to date to get through our parents, or get through a season of weddings in this case. And it felt to me like it was so culturally appropriate to Indian American culture and the realities that my friends were going through. It's funny. I mean, my parents weren't particularly pushy, didn't set me up. I met my husband at work, but it was something that so many people around me were experiencing. And I also felt that there weren't, my parents have been in the country since the 70s. There weren't really that many movies outside of 1 or 2 examples that really captured that generation, what they did coming over kind of as pioneers. And so it was combining really wanting to capture my community and also this reality of figuring out marriage as an Indian American and melding that into a romantic comedy, which was my favorite genre. And so that's really where it came from.
That's awesome. So writing very personally, that's the thing you hear a lot of people say, like the tip that a lot of people give is write something that's very personal to you. And romantic comedies, by the way, one of my favorite genres of all time. And we need more romantic comedies coming out right now. So it's amazing that that's the genre you went with, and that it's having the success that it's having, because they're not nearly as popular as they were, back in the 90s, back in the 80s. So what tips do you have for like a lot of the screencraft community are people just starting, people who are like, just starting to dabble with screenwriting? What tips can you give anyone who is maybe submitted their first screenplay, didn't get some good, feedback, or maybe it didn't have any success? Like, what tips can you give to continue to push yourself to work on it?
Yeah, I think it's so hard because when you're starting to learn a new craft, you don't know what you don't know. And so I think it's forgive yourself. I think people get that one round of bad feedback. And I think this is where being a career writer in other ways helped. I know that feedback and editing is just part of the process. Very few writers produce a good first draft. And I think the ones that do, it's years of producing bad drafts before they get to that level. And so I think it's go easy on yourself and know that even professionals produce bad first drafts often. And you have to get notes, you have to revise. And if anything, learning to do that, I think sets you up to be a professional screenwriter, because getting notes, revising, going with the flow, being willing to change what isn't working, I think that's actually one of the most important skills of being a professional screenwriter.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's a good mentality to have. Can't take it personally. You have to think of it part of the business, So I would love to know, I'm not sure how much you can talk about or how much you'd want to go into the detail. I would love to know the process of when you submitted, and then kind of the steps, or like, what was the next thing that happened after you got runner up? I know you got connected with a manager, but what was what's been the process since then? It's just crazy. It's been a wild ride, it seems like, for you. So what was like the process after you got that runner up placement?
It has been crazy. So the year that it placed second, I just remember it was the summer that Crazy Rich Asians was in the theaters.
Oh, yeah.
So I just think the mentality around diversity and the idea that diverse storylines could be fun, could attract big audiences, that seed had been planted. And so I remember that. And when it placed as a runner-up, I spoke to Tom at ScreenCraft, and he gave me great advice, which was, before we go out to managers, to whoever, start putting my name out there, to have a second piece of writing polished and ready to go. And I say, thinking back on advice in your previous question, I think a lot of times people think, well, I wrote my one script here. And in the interim, I had been working on other material. It's not like I had only been working on wedding season. I had a pilot that was in pretty good shape. So I took Tom's advice and I really polished that pilot in the next month, maybe, after placing, because what he told me was, for managers, or really anybody, to take you seriously, they want to make sure that this is something you could do again. They want to see what your voice is and what your style is. And so I got that ready. And when we went out to managers, sure enough, they said, well, what else does she have? And I had that sample ready. So that was really good advice. And it also helped me figure out, which I think is also important, like, what am I about as a writer? What is my voice? What am I trying to say? What am I trying to do? And so I think knowing all of that before meeting people in the industry was really valuable. So I did meet my manager at Affirmative through ScreenCraft. And also, I think that was great. And then maybe, I want to say a month later, it turned out that a producer who had a relationship with ScreenCraft was looking to bring romantic comedies to Netflix. And because mine had recently won this, or placed second in this contest, Tom said, I think we have just the script for you. And so he read the script and we got connected. But it's funny, I think that was by the time we actually started working on getting the script ready to pitch to Netflix. I think it was probably almost a year. I think it was just shy of probably 8 months. So these things take so much time, which I don't think I realized. But, I think when you go into pitch, you've got that one shot. So you want to make sure the script is as polished as it can be, that you have a good sense of what it's about, what's the theme, what you're trying to say. So we spent a lot of time on that before he ever even went in and pitched it to Netflix. So there were many steps.
I would love to ask you. I mean, I definitely don't like, I want to put a pin in this because I want to ask you about pitching. That's one of these things that for a lot of writers, very nerve wracking. But I am curious. So when you went to polish up the pilot that you wrote, did you write in the same genre? Did you do a different genre? Like, what are your tips on, should you stick to one genre? Do you think writers should explore different things? I know you said knowing your voice is really important, but did you kind of keep it in the same lane, or did you branch out a little bit with your pilot?
Yeah, it was not a romantic comedy, but it was still a dramedy. It was still a comedy where a lot of the elements had to do with this family figuring each other out and impacting each other's lives. So I would say it had some of the same threads as Wedding Season. If somebody read it, they wouldn't feel like they were reading another writer, but I think it showed a little bit of range without going completely crazy, if that makes sense. Because yeah, go ahead.
Oh, just like, you basically are capturing your voice as a writer, and it worked for you, obviously. So like, it's good advice that we should try to, if we branch off too much, and like you just said, you would know it's coming from the same writer, which means you have a very strong voice, which is very important, and it worked for you. So yeah.
And I think it's also writing in a genre that you like, because I find that now with Wedding Season coming out and my sample scripts being in similar comedy, dramedy spaces, those are the kinds of jobs I'm often up for. Those are the things people want to see from me. And fortunately, I really like that space. But I think people I know often think, well, right now, like thrillers are hot. And you just have to be careful, because you could write a great thriller, but that might not be what you want to be writing.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's the advice, like with the interviews I've been doing recently, that's one common thread everyone says is whatever you are working on, you got to be passionate about it and really have that connection to it. Okay, please tell me about pitching. This is the thing.
Okay.
Like, we're all going to get to that point, hopefully, where we have to go into a room and pitch our story. Like, what was that process like? And how did you put it together? How did you learn how to pitch your story?
Yeah. Well, in this case, I should say that the producer did the pitching, but in the process of him pitching, I learned a lot, because, I always thought that you just go in and you tell the story and that's that. But I realize now, I mean, I can tell you what my pitching process is that I've learned. I mean, the first time I had to pitch by myself, I went in basically ready to tell a story, and I realized it just fell flat. And so I thought, what am I missing? Because we're storytellers, right? And, I got a lot of advice from other people in the industry, from my manager, my agent. I realized I probably should have asked what I didn't know. But you don't know what you don't know. So I realized that after the first pitch, clearly this did not go great. And now what I do is, I realize so much of it is selling yourself and the fact that you are the perfect person to write this story or tell this story if it's an original work, and why you're passionate about it, why it matters. And so I will typically start with a little bit about myself, but in a way that relates to the story. And then from there, I'll talk about, the theme of the story, why I think it's so important to tell a story like that right now, get into a little bit of the characters, and then tell the story. So I tee it up first. And when I tell the story now too, I try to be a little bit less chronological, and then this, and then this, and then this, and then this, and really try to paint a picture, bring in some of the dialogue, bring in some of the description. And I typically go about 20 minutes in my pitches.
Gotcha.
I don't know if that's the norm, but I think I was underprepared for my first few pitches. I think you really put a lot of work into that pitch, because once you've pitched it to a place, that's it, right? You get the one shot. So I think that's really what I've learned about pitching, is why you're the person to do this and really sell that.
I love that. I mean, that's so, you would never really know that, like, if you've never done it before, like selling yourself, like you said, tying yourself to the story, why you're the best person to write that. That's like, I would not really think of that. Like, I thought you would think that they would just kind of want to know the story, but it makes perfect sense that you got to tie yourself into it.
It's you can bring to it, which I think is in a way really reassuring, because, everybody says, oh, there's 3 versions of every script circulating out there. And I've realized, well, maybe, but nobody's telling it exactly the way you are. And so why is the way that you're telling it important?
Yeah, for sure. For sure. And I'm curious too, when you start to get into the details of a pitch, do you ever go into like, I know you said you do talk about themes and some of the broader themes. Do you ever go into like the nitty gritty, like subtext or like the deeper details, or do you keep it more kind of plot and character driven when you do, or do you get into the nitty gritty stuff too?
I will say, I wouldn't say that I get super nitty gritty, but what I do get into is the emotional impact. I think I heard Shonda Rhimes say this in an interview once, where in a pitch, she would describe the scene, and then at the end, she would say, it's incredibly moving, or in an incredibly funny moment, because you have the scene in your head, right? You've thought about this so much, but the people in the room are, maybe they've heard 3 pitches that day. And so you're constantly trying to get their attention with the story. And so
Gotcha.
I think it's really about emotional impact more than anything.
Gotcha. Yeah, I love that. I appreciate you going in. I'm sitting here taking notes. Like
the pitching,
it's like, it really is for me. It's been the most like abstract, like thing. Like, how do you get the passion that you have for your story across to someone else, And so I think it is one of the most important things. So I really appreciate you going into it.
No problem.
So then what was kind of like, what happened after that? What was the next step? So you had the manager, you got connected to a producer, you pitched the story. Then what was kind of the next step after that?
So after that, once again, there was a lot of waiting before Netflix officially decided to go into development with this project, to have me working on the script. But once all the boring paperwork and all that was done, there was a revision process. And I think it just goes to show, you're really never done with the script until the movie shoots. And even then you keep thinking, oh, I could have changed that, or, oh, I wish I had written it that way. So you're really never done. And, I did a revision of my own based on notes from the executives there. And, you realize, Netflix has a long history of doing romantic comedies. They know what they're doing. And so they would sort of come to you with saying, what their audience wants and what their audience responds to. And you take that and you revise the script to hopefully be what they need. And
Gotcha.
There, of course, there was bringing on the next producer at Imagine, there was bringing on the director, and every step of the way, the script changed a little bit. And you've heard people say this. It's changed literally on the day that people shoot, because there's location needs, there's weather needs, the actors have an idea. So it's really a dynamic process, and it was cool to see. And I didn't feel precious about it. It was really amazing to see it evolve and become something bigger than just mine,
I love that. I was about to ask you about that. And I would just love to get your thoughts on this, but how important do you think it is for writers to be able to not be precious about their work? I know I've met these writers. I have friends like this, writers that are just, and also this kind of goes into something else I want to ask you about. Writers who are just so precious about their idea, almost they don't want to do revisions. They feel like it's hard to collaborate. And then also, I would love to get your thoughts on how important is an idea, or is execution the most important thing? So would love to get your thoughts on that.
Those are really good questions. I think that if you are a writer director who is well trusted and well funded, you absolutely, that's the dream, I think, to be able to have, to be an auteur, to have the singular vision that's brilliant and you can execute it well with a great team. But I think you have to earn that. I think people get there through years of learning. I remember hearing M. Night Shyamalan talk about how, I believe the movie he worked on before The Sixth Sense was Stuart Little. He really learned the ropes in the industry across all these different genres before he got the chance to be the auteur that he is now, right? And I think I had heard that script had gone through a lot of revisions. He'd been shopping it around for a while, and then it hit, and now we all think of him as being a genius, and he is a genius, but he earned it and he worked to get there. So I think, of course, we all want that, right? On some level, but I think you have to earn it. And I think the thing that I've learned too is that we all have our bad tendencies in our writing. I think, I can overwrite my witty dialogue sometimes. And it's really nice to have other people who can check your bad tendencies and you can check their bad tendencies and maybe have ideas that you hadn't thought of. And I think film is inherently collaborative. That's what I realized. Like if you just want to have total control over your piece of writing, I mean, it's probably better to write a novel, because if this thing's going to get made and you're not the director, there are going to be, and even if you are the director, there's going to be actors, there's going to be execs, there inherently are going to be people weighing in. And I think if you can get away from the mindset that they're ruining the script, and instead, everyone says, find the note behind the note. I don't think anybody wants to make your script worse. I think everybody's coming at it from the best of intentions. And so I think if you treat it like a collaboration and hear, okay, what I hear is this isn't working. Maybe I don't like the solution, but I can find a better one, And so I think you really have to go into it with that mindset, especially when you're starting out. But I think it leads to better work being collaborative. And I saw it firsthand. And, I really think it's important. And I guess, should I just go into your second question about that?
I would love to get your thoughts on like writers who are, because this, I mean, working with ScreenCraft now, like, kind of in the same position as you, I'm doing a bunch of freelance jobs, and like screenwriting is my passion, but you got to pay the bills. And in ScreenCraft, like, I do notice some people in other screenwriting communities I've been in too, like people who are so precious about ideas in and of themselves that they're almost afraid to share ideas, So I heard you kind of touched on it earlier. Execution, there could be 3 scripts like yours, but execution is important. But I would love to just get your thoughts on that whole notion.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, when I was working on Wedding Season, the first couple drafts, I was living in San Francisco, and everybody there was working on a startup at the time, the same way everybody in LA is working on a screenplay. And you'd hear everyone say, well, I don't want to say what the idea is. I don't want to say what the idea is. And then you kind of started to realize it wasn't about the idea. It was about the people who were able to actually make it happen. So I increasingly think, I mean, of course, there are some ideas that are very unique, right? And you want to guard. I think you want to be a little bit guarded, but honestly, I feel that it's not about the idea. I think it's about the execution. I mean, of course, we all talk about Hollywood wants high concept scripts. Of course, there's great ideas. You can't deny that. You'll hear a great log line or pitch, and you'll be like, wow, what a great idea. Of course that exists. But I think at the end of the day, it's execution that makes us love a movie. I mean, I think about this. There are so many movies that follow similar tropes. People often say this about romantic comedies, but it's true in every genre. I mean, superhero movies have similar tropes, but we love them anyway when they're executed well. So I think people shouldn't be so afraid that somebody else has a similar idea. I think you just focus on doing it in your voice. That's really what I've come to find.
I love that. Like, and what advice do you have for people? So first off, like the advice is don't be afraid, put your idea out there, focus on execution. What advice do you have for people in finding their voice when you're first starting out? It can be very, very hard to recognize what kind of style you even want to write or what your voice is. And it seems like you've done such a good job of capturing your voice. Like, what tips or advice do you have for people just starting to get into it?
Yeah. I mean, it's funny. I asked my manager once, how did you know you wanted to sign me? And he said, well, I liked your voice. And I said, well, what did you mean? And he said, it's funny, when you're reading something that has it, and when you're reading something that doesn't. And then I started thinking about the TV shows that really influenced me. And I was a big fan of Amy Sherman Palladino. I had always liked Gilmore Girls. I still really love Marvelous Mrs. Maisel. And you just know when you're watching something of hers. Yeah. You can feel it in the dialogue. It's the same thing with Nora Ephron or Mindy Kaling. You know it. And so I think the first way to understand what voice is just thinking about what you love and why you love it, So when I really paid attention to the things that I liked, I realized so much of it was in the dialogue. So my voice tends to be more dialogue driven, it tends to be, I love the witty banter, right? So all hallmarks of romantic comedies. But, when I wrote at first, I think I heard Ira Glass of American Life say this once, that when you start, you kind of start mimicking other people. And so I went back and read some of the earliest scenes I wrote, not for wedding season, but just homework for these classes. And I could tell I was trying to sound like Nora Ephron. I was trying to sound like Mindy Kaling. I was trying to sound like Amy Sherman Palladino. And when I read it, it just sounds like I was trying so hard. But in a way, I think doing that, like a lot of people say, write a spec script for a show that you love, like write, if there's a sitcom you love, try writing in that voice, actually. And I think it teaches you what writing in a voice means. And just the more you write, the more you'll find that it becomes more overwrought trying to write like other people, because you realize somewhere in there you found the way that you like to write. But I think in a way, trying to emulate your favorites is a great way to figure out what you like, don't like, and what you want to say.
Gotcha. Yeah, I love that. That's really good advice. Like, focus on the things you love. Why do you love them? Try to emulate it, and then just practice over and over. And eventually you'll start to like recognize your own voice. I'm curious, what are some of what people or movies, filmmakers you think influenced you the most? I would love to know. I know you said romantic comedies, Nora Ephron, she's amazing. What are some other people that influenced you the most?
Yeah, definitely. I would say early me was Nora Ephron. I would say it's hard not to cite Mindy Kaling as an influence, because The Office, when it came out, I mean, she was really the first person I could think of who looked like me, who was writing comedy in a fresh voice, who wasn't playing a caricature or somebody with an accent. And so and just the fact that she wrote really brash characters, she wasn't afraid to write unlikable characters at times. So I think that was a big influence for me, the idea that I could break out of the mold of what was expected of South Asian or Asian characters. So she was definitely a big influence for me. I would say Amy Sherman Palladino again, because I think I always liked really fast banter. And I felt when I look back on old movies, like I really love this movie Broadcast News from the 80s. And I think it was often relegated to the workplace or to the realm of men. And I think seeing it play out in this world, like this story between a mother and a daughter, and Wedding Season in many ways is a story about a mother and a daughter, and they are funny and they are complicated. And so I think that also was a big influence for me. I could cite a million, but I think like from my heart, those are the ones that really played a big role.
I love it. I love that. Yeah. Broadcast News is such a good movie. For me, like 80s, I'd have to say 80s probably is like my favorite time. I mean, movies were just so much more like optimistic and bright, and like you always got left with like this happy, motivated feeling and from like a lot of movies.
Like Broadcast News felt, I don't know, it felt glamorous and big, and
yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, so I'm curious. You kind of mentioned this a little bit earlier, and I put a little note, but how important do you think it is, or what advice do you have in terms of like getting feedback from people and being a part of some type of community where you can bounce ideas around? Something that I hear people talk about is like how hard and lonely writing is. And of course it is, but like, did you have a community of people you trusted? Did you have people that you could send your scripts to? Do you think it is important to be able to put your scripts out there and get it outside of the echo chamber and like get feedback from people and stuff? What was your process when you're first starting out with all that?
I do think it's important, especially when you're starting out, because, now I get feedback from my manager. I have, friends in the industry I can go to, but when you're starting out, you don't necessarily have that. And I think classes, people ask me, especially with not being based in LA, how do you build that community? And I think classes are great, especially because so many of them post-pandemic are on Zoom, and you can meet people all over the world who are trying to write good scripts. And I was really impressed with how many people I met who were good. I think, you meet people who who want this as badly as you do. And I think having people you can trade scripts with, learning to give feedback too. I think everybody thinks like, oh, giving feedback is such a pain. I have to read this whole script. But I realized in the beginning, I didn't know how to give feedback on a script. And I think trading and not only getting feedback on your script, but learning to give feedback makes you a better writer. But I think it's invaluable. And I think even as a pro, because when you're so close to something and say your manager has met it or read it a million times, having a few people you can go to with fresh eyes is really important. And I don't know that that ever goes away.
Yeah, gotcha. And then just like I was just thinking of this as you were talking about that, what advice, and you can go wherever you want to go with this, but what advice do you have for people who are struggling with procrastination? That's one thing we all struggle with, but also just staying motivated when you're first getting started. You know, like, do you have any kind of techniques or things that you tell yourself, or any like processes or whatever to keep yourself? I mean, now it's different, but when you were, like, you know, you have this amazing movie coming out on Netflix, but when you were first starting out, like, how did you keep yourself motivated? How did you, and you said you were working other jobs, like, how did you manage your time? How did you deal with, like, you know, procrastination and setting deadlines and everything?
Yeah, that's interesting. I worked as a copywriter in tech for a while. And I took a lot of the management techniques from tech companies and applied them to screenwriting. So there's this one thing called OKRs that a lot of tech companies use. And I think it's objectives and key results. So I would send these weekly emails I had a friend who was also she wasn't trying to get a writing career going, but she had other things she was trying to get going outside of her day job. And so we would send each other these weekly emails. And they were basically, you'd had a yearly objective. I think you had quarterly objectives, and then you had weekly objectives. So, you know, my annual objective was place in a screenwriting contest. And I think I was doing this at the time the script placed in ScreenCraft. And then my quarterly objective was, you know, finally finish this draft of wedding season. And then the weekly was, you know, hit page 20 or whatever. And then there'd be, you know, other results like research contests, join a class, or find a writer's group. So I would use the system of OKRs to basically keep myself accountable every week, but I would also share it with somebody else who could say, hey, like, you're not even close to hitting these objectives that you set. Wow. And so it was great. And having somebody else who's also trying to achieve something was nice. So, and I don't think it has to be somebody who's a screenwriter. I think it could be anybody in your life who's like, good for you. And the other thing that I still use is this thing called the Pomodoro timer. So I never feel like writing when I first sit down still. And all it is like a 25-minute timer and a 5-minute break. And then a 25-minute timer and a 5-minute break. And then I think at the end of like 25 minutes, you get like a 30-minute break. And it just gets you going. And oftentimes I don't even want to take the 5-minute break, but I think for that first 25 minutes, sometimes the first 25 minutes is painful, but by the second, you're usually going and you don't want to. So I
love these techniques.
Yeah, they're just ways of tricking your brain into doing stuff. But I'm just as unmotivated and procrastinate just as much as anybody else. But it's just taking these systems that I saw other people use to be efficient and being like, okay, I'm going to apply that to myself and what I care about.
That's awesome. I'm going to look into the OKRs, like that, just the idea of setting these goals and having someone that you can share your progress with. Like, I mean, that's probably just a game changer for a lot of people.
Yeah. And I don't even think it has to be formatted that way. I mean, I don't even know that we stuck to the same format every week, but it was just checking in every week and having these long-term and short-term goals. I think that's all it is.
Cool. I would love to, because we, you know, it's already 12:15. I could talk to you forever, but I would love for you to dive a little bit into like your process for storytelling. How did you come up with this story? Or even you said you love writing dialogue. That is a thing that a lot of us struggle with, is writing good dialogue. Like, what tips do you, or I guess to start with, like, how do you go about developing your story? Do you outline? Do you start with plot? Do you start with character? Would love to know your process a little bit.
Yeah, it's funny. It's changed a lot. I used to not be an outliner, and now I am a diehard outliner. So The way I kind of start now when I have an idea, I'll have like the seed of an idea, and I actually like to write it out as a log line first. And I think it's because it helps me figure out if there's really something there. Like, is there a conflict? Because I think when you write like a log line, you usually ends it with like the conflict, like, can they save the world or will they get together, you know? And so I write it out as a log line to help me see, is there something there? And even if there isn't, from there, I'll flesh it out just into a 1 or 2 pager with characters and, you know, some ideas for the story, just to see, is there something there? Because I think sometimes you don't know, or maybe you're not ready to really work on that yet. And then I have a few of those. You know, I probably have like 3 or 4 of those right now that like maybe will be the next thing. And I just have a file of those, you know?
Sure. Yeah.
And from there, if I decide it is the next thing, I do outline. I have my log line. I write the theme, what I think the theme is or what I'm trying to say. It often changes, brief character descriptions. And then, I actually just straight up break it out by, act 1, inciting incident, break into 2. I actually break out what I think the action is going to be. And then I just fill it out from there. So
do you have any books that you read that you would recommend anyone reading,
yeah,
or any videos online or anything like that either?
Yeah, I feel like it's probably actually from Save the Cat, but I've just modified it over the years to be my own,
Yeah.
But I'm pretty sure that the very first beat sheet or outline that I made was a version of the Save the Cat beat sheet. And
Gotcha.
I've just made it my own. But I also really liked when I was starting out, because I think it's funny, you see those tools, and I realize now that I use it very differently than I did when I was starting out, because now I see it and I immediately know how to fill out the action. UCLA had this book called Cut to the Chase, where they add a lot more in detail into what typically happens in each of those sections. So this is, it would say something like, well, this is typically where the character meets the mentor. Because I think when you haven't done it a million times, filling out a beat sheet like that is actually really intimidating. And you don't have a sense of the pacing yet. And so I thought that book, the UCLA book, Cut to the Chase, was really helpful with figuring out, well, what actually goes there,
Gotcha.
I'll
have to look that book up for sure.
Intuit it over time.
Gotcha.
And then always outline before I write, because I didn't do that the first 2 times and I paid the price.
I mean, that's I wanted to ask you, because this is what I've been hearing over and over and over. Outlining is so important. What was it that got you to finally say, like, I need to outline? Like, what was that shift? Was it just like how much you struggled with the first ones, or did someone, like a manager or someone, tell you like, hey, you need to try outlining? Like, what was it that finally gave you that push?
I think it was a combination of, one, realizing that had I just outlined the first time around, it would have helped me get to the ends of that first draft much faster. And then I think it was also just, people ask for it. A producer had basically said, we're interested in this idea. We need we need a treatment, which is effectively a long outline. And you realize that even if you don't naturally like outlining, it is fun to free write. And I do still free write to get ideas when I'm figuring out scenes. It's not all perfectly laid out, but I think knowing the beats is helpful. And I think it's expected. If you're going to be working at a professional level, I am always asked to turn in an outline or treatment for everything.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's someone else that I chatted with was like, well, when you become professional, you have to do it because you're getting paid to do it. So you better learn how to do it now anyway. Yeah. So, and then I would love to know a little bit about your process with character development. Like, how do you go about developing characters? Like, what do you start with characters? I know you said a second ago, you'll just do like quick character descriptions. Do you ever do like longer backstories, or do you do like intention and obstacle, which is what most people are talking about? But how do you go about developing characters?
First, it'll just start with how old they are, what they look like. But I think intention and obstacle. So I usually frame it as like what their biggest problem is, what they like think they want and versus what they need, you know? So like, and I also have internal want versus external want. Because I think, you know, the thing that I think I struggled with the most in the beginning was the fact that, you know, your character has to change from the beginning to the end. And you need to show a meaningful change where you think, wow, like that character couldn't have done that at the beginning. And so I really try to spell out, you know, what their big problem is up front, what their want is, and how they change at the end. And I just have that in the character description so that it's cemented and I don't lose track of it.
Gotcha. Love it.
And sometimes I will write dialogue there too, like in my description, like how would they talk, you know?
Give me some tips on dialogue. You know, you're mentioning you love the back and forth, fast paced dialogue. I would love just any tips you have on, like, do you think it's something that just kind of comes natural? Can you get better? Can you improve? Do you ever like emulate dialogue? You know, any tips that you have, would love any tips.
It's funny. I mean, I thought I was all the rage at dialogue. And then when I really sat down to work with the director on Wedding Season, Tom Day, I learned so much from him about, I think about how, I don't want to say trying too hard. I think I was giving too much exposition, you know, so I was trying to give all of this history or, you know, all of what the meaning of this relationship is in a few lines of dialogue. And of course, that's not really how people talk. And so he was a great mentor. And I think going through that process, I really learned to say less and to have more in subtext. And I think that's something I've gotten much better at now. And I do think you can get better. I mean, I like eavesdropping, but of course, I also just read a lot of scripts. And when I'm watching stuff that I really like, I'll also have the script in front of me sometimes and compare. But I think the thing that I think people can do the most to get better is to figure out how to say what you want to say without saying it. Is like practice subtext, you know? So you have two characters who I can use the example from In the Mood for Love by Wong Kar-wai. There's these two characters who are trying to tell each other that their partners are cheating on them with each other. But instead of just saying it, you know, he's like, well, where did you get that tie? Oh, interesting. You know, my husband was on a business trip. So it's like they get there through innuendo and suggestion and they never say it, but you know what they mean. So I think going through exercises like that is really, really helpful for getting better because of course you just want to say what they're thinking, but that's not good dialogue. It turns out.
Well, I would love, I mean, you bring it, subtext is one, you know, it's one of these things you don't hear a lot of people talking about subtext all that much when I listen to like interviews, but how much do you think about subtext? Do you really plan things out? Do you kind of let it happen and then go, like, do you plan out subtext as you're writing or do you kind of write and then go back and layer in certain things? I'd love to know your process.
I think that's, so, you know, people say like outlining feels so structured. I think an area where I'm very free is, okay, I'll just basically say like, this is what needs to happen in this scene. Like in this scene, we need to know that these characters secretly like each other, but can't admit it. Right. And so then I'll play and write like a ton of dialogue, just free write a ton of dialogue and figure out like how they would talk to each other. And then from there, I'll go and whittle it down into like this, into the scene.
Gotcha. So free writing, that's like what I'm hearing. Doing a lot of free writing, it seems like is something that can be very helpful. So
yeah, and that's where the freedom is. People are like, well, I don't want to be so restricted by an outline, but I think of it as it gives you the freedom to play within the scene because you know where the scene needs to go, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. Definitely. So, okay, we're kind of coming to, it's almost 12:30. So again, like your story has just been amazing. And I'm sure it's so inspiring for people in the ScreenCraft community submitting to contests and just kind of, you know, even if they're not having success, I would love to just get any last thoughts that you have on your journey, like anything on how ScreenCraft helped or any advice on people who are in these early stages of submitting to contests. Like for me, talking to someone like you and getting your story, it's just so motivating and it's so hopeful because it can be so hard to see that future, you know, but it's just so amazing hearing about what you've gone through and what you've done. And you say be patient, but I would love to just get any last thoughts you have or any last tips or any last pieces of advice that you have.
Well, I think it's important to note that from my first screenwriting class to now has been 10 years. So, because I think you hear like, oh, it won in 2018, so it's only been 4 years, or placed second in 2018, it's only been 4 years. But it really has been longer than that. Yeah. And I think every professional writer says that. So I think, and there were times in there, like I said, when my kids were really little, like I think there was probably a good year that I didn't really write. And I think people are really hard on themselves. And I think having kids was like a good excuse to be like, well, you know what? I forgive myself. That was a really good reason to take some time off, but I'm going to come back to it. Yeah. And what I did too, in the times when I wasn't writing, was I tried to, like, I listened to Script Notes podcast. I tried to just stay up on it when life was too busy, because I think that realistically happens when you're not getting paid to do this and you've got a family or other responsibilities. Like, there are going to be periods where you can't write every day, even though everyone says write every day. So I think there's other ways. Like I loved Script Notes podcast. I went to go see, I remember Delia Ephron was passing through San Francisco. I went to go see her speak and I got her to sign my book, and she was like, finish that screenplay. So, awesome. I think if you can't be writing, forgive yourself, know that you'll come back to it, and find other ways to just stay engaged, read scripts, watch movies, and just trust that you'll come back to it and commit to coming back to it. I told myself when, the twins were finally like in daycare or with their nanny rather, that I would go back to it. And I still had my day job that was, it wasn't quite full time. So I had a little bit of time to write, and I just, every Friday I would do my homework for my classes. So I think you just carve out the time where you can, forgive yourself that you can't do it every single day, and just keep going, because I think for some people it's less than 10 years, for some people it's more, but you never know when it might happen for you. I think that's the thing.
So, well, I really, really appreciate this conversation. Again, it's just so motivating hearing you say that, especially just don't be hard on yourself, keep going. And it's okay to not write every day. You have to figure out how to fit it into what your life is. I mean, that's something, well, I guess actually one last quick little thing I would love to ask you.
Totally fine.
Do you hear people all the time saying you have to give up everything and commit fully, but it sounds like you didn't take that route, and you have found great success in, managing your kids, managing a job. So I would love to get your thoughts on, do you think people have to give up? Do you think people can figure out ways to go about this with whatever they're going through in life? It's very, for me, it's inspiring, because I have a daughter, and this is I struggled for a long time not writing and kind of thinking I have to give up on it. And my mentality's changed, but would love to just get any last, pieces of advice you have there.
I think I read at some point that the average age of a screenwriter on a studio movie is 46. And I held on to that. I don't remember when I read it, but I held on to that because I think that we all love stories of young success and young geniuses. And of course, they're amazing. But I think the vast majority of people slog and don't necessarily find their success until later. And I think that's okay. And I think sometimes you have more to say when you're older, Yeah. So I think not expecting it or needing it too soon, and just going because you have something to say it's really important. And I think in terms of giving up everything to do it, I mean, most people just don't have the luxury. And I mean, I had some privilege in the sense that I had a flexible job. I had a partner with a flexible job. My husband also made his own hours. So some of us do have more leeway than others, but I've seen people with full-time jobs and kids just even carve out, an hour a night and, 5 pages a week. A screenplay is 100 pages, right? So, in a few months, even if you're just doing 5 pages a week, like you can have in 20 weeks, you can have a screenplay. So I think it's carving out what you've got. And I think the all or nothing mindset is harmful because most of us can't do it. Yeah. And I think that it also puts a lot of pressure on it.
Yeah.
Definitely.
I really appreciate this. And thank you again. Congratulations on the movie.
Thank you. Good luck with your script too.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Keep me posted on what happens. I'd love to hear.
Definitely will. Thank you.
Yeah. Anytime. Bye.